There is a kind of silence that tastes of iron, not from the sword, but from the mouth that once whispered love, now sealed in dread, before the axe falls, before the scream curdles the winter air. There is a stillness. It does not beg. It does not forgive. It only waits. They called her a rose, not the blooming kind that bends toward sunlight, but the pressed one flattened between pages of a forgotten psalter, its color drained, its scent embalmed in time. Catherine Howard, 5th Queen, barely a woman, a flicker of warmth in the cruel frost of Henry's dwindling years. She danced, she laughed, she sinned, or so they said. But what sins are left when your breath is no longer yours? When your beauty is not your own, but the crown's last attempt to resurrect virility in the body of a king, turned carcass. She came to court not as a storm, but as perfume. You didn't see her enter. You felt her on your skin, a hush before she smiled, a warmth before she vanished. She was not loved. She was devoured, youth as offering, flesh as forgiveness. History remembers the blade, but the horror lived in the hours before, when walls whispered your name in accusation, when doors stopped opening and no candle was ever truly lit for you again. Her death was not one of flames, nor of grandeur. It was of erasure, a soul smothered under protocol, scandal, and the weight of what she could not undo. Her crime, to remember affection, to believe in touch, to forget that in Tudor courts, a woman is not kissed, she is inspected. And so the girl queen was led barefoot into memory, stripped of silk, stripped of sound. Not even the crows dared speak. Only the tower held her, now its stones heavy with the echo of 100 names who once believed they were special. But in the end, they all learned the same truth: the king never leaves love alive. She was never meant to be queen, not in the way legends are, not carved from prophecy or crowned in rebellion. Catherine Howard was a petal loosened from the vine, carried not by fate but by appetite, drifting through the poisoned air of Henry's court like incense sweet, vanishing, dangerous, born into the Howard name but raised in the shadows of its glory. She was schooled not by scholars, but by watchers' ladies with sharp smiles and sharper memories, eyes that measured a girl's bloom like fruit on the edge of ripeness. Her education was not arithmetic, but a lure. In the Duchess of Norfolk's household, there were no hymns to chastity, only the soft clink of jewels and the rustle of dresses pulled too quickly off the floor. There, young girls were watched like livestock, and the value of a maiden was in how convincingly she could seem untouched. Catherine learned early how to survive with a smile, how to keep her secrets tucked behind laughter, how to lower her gaze just enough to seem humble, but never so much that a man might lose interest. By the time she arrived at court, the game was already inside her veiled glances, quiet steps, and the silence of survival. She was not a schemer, not a tactician like Anne Boleyn before her. Catherine did not wield seduction as a weapon. She simply breathed, and that was enough to make the room lean toward her. Her presence was not thunderous. It was suffocating, like a velvet ribbon pulled gently across the throat. The king noticed her, not as a man starved of companionship, but as a beast desperate for resurrection. Henry was no longer the Golden Prince. His legs oozed infection, his pride, bloated with memory, dripped from every word. He needed not a wife, but a spell. And Catherine, barely 17, was the mirror he chose to lie to him. She called him handsome, and he believed it. She danced, and he imagined his body could still bend without groaning. In her, he saw a version of himself that hadn't rotted yet. The courtiers watched with practiced stillness. They had seen this theater before, where love was currency, and each kiss left a receipt in blood. Catherine was adored with urgency, then married with haste. The court bloomed with celebration, but beneath the petals, Something darker coiled. The air shifted. The walls leaned in. A queen who smiles too easily is a queen who forgets her place. And Catherine had forgotten that queens are not girls. They are relics, displayed, not touched, preserved, not lived. She played at innocence, not knowing that it would become the rope around her neck. Her past, like all pasts in Tudor halls, was not buried, it was archived, waiting, patient. The palace at Hampton Court grew colder after the wedding, though no one dared mention it. Whispers trailed behind her like a second gown. Names long buried began to stir in the mouths of chambermaids. Francis Derham, Henry Mannix, ghosts with breath, fingernails, and memories. Catherine had loved before, or something like it. And in a kingdom where a woman's body is a contract, love becomes treason if not notarized by the crown. The court began to fracture under its own reflection. The queen glowed too brightly. She laughed too freely. She leaned in too often. What had once made her desirable now made her dangerous. Every candle that lit her face now seemed an interrogation. Every smile a confession. Her chamber was no longer sanctuary. It was exhibit. Every creak in the night could be a spy. Every friendly hand might be the start of a noose. The architecture of power is not built on stone, but on silence. And Catherine, once trained in the art of silence, had begun to forget her own lessons. She moved with the breathlessness of youth, unaware that every step was being counted. Thomas Cranmer watched from a distance, his eyes always calculating. He did not hate the Queen. He did not need to. In Tudor courts, you do not destroy from malice. You destroy because it is the rhythm of survival. One must shed flesh to avoid rot. And Catherine, in all her softness, began to smell too much like decay. The king began to withdraw from her bed, not because she had changed, but because he had remembered who he was. Not a lover, but a collector. He did not sleep beside wives. He placed them in tombs and moved on. Catherine, still radiant, still hopeful, began to write letters in secret. She still believed in hearts. She still believed in forgiveness. She whispered her thoughts to Lady Rochford, never knowing that even echoes betray. The walls of Hampton Court do not forget. They absorb. And one morning, when the frost had barely melted from the windows, the questions began, not shouted, not thundered, but whispered. What do you know of her? Who was she before the king? What did you see? And what did you touch? It spread like a rot that finally found its way to the bone. The air in the queen's chambers grew thick with dread. Doors no longer opened without knocks that sounded like warnings. Servants became shadows. Her gowns, once vibrant, now clung to her like guilt. The queen began to pace, alone in her rooms, tracing the same line across the floor as if hoping to erase herself from the tapestry. But there is no escape when your name has already been carved into the ledger of suspicion. She was summoned not to be heard, but to be accused. And the king, once bloated with adoration, now swelled with betrayal. His face did not move when her name was read aloud. It cracked only slightly when they mentioned the letters. He had loved her, or whatever remained of his capacity for such a word. But more importantly, he had believed in her youth. And belief, once wounded, becomes vengeance. Now Catherine was no longer queen, not in title, not in warmth, not even in illusion. She was the fifth, and that number tasted like failure. 1 was annulled, 2 was murdered, 3 died, 4 was sent away, and now 5 must be silenced. The court recoiled politely. Those who had once bowed to her now stared at her slippers. Her name began to disappear from documents. Her crest faded from embroidery. History does not erase with fire, it does so with indifference. But Catherine, despite her fear, did not wail. She pleaded, yes, she wept. in corners where no one could see. But she did not scream, not yet. The tower awaited, not with urgency, but with patience. The scaffold was not yet built. The blade had not yet been chosen. But time, in Tudor England, does not need speed to be cruel. It moves slowly, methodically, with the weight of ceremony. Her days were now numbered not in letters, but in the glances of guards. And each hour felt more like an echo than a breath. She still believed, in the deepest hollow of her chest, that the king might forgive her, that the man who once called her his rose without a thorn might remember the scent. She clung to that phrase like a lifeline, whispering it in the dark like a spell. But even spells need belief on both ends. And Henry had stopped believing long ago. He now looked at her with the eyes of a butcher, clinical, detached, already measuring where the blade would fall. Catherine, in her youth, had mistaken love for safety. She had never understood that in this court, affection is only the prelude to annihilation. She wandered the corridors of memory, barefoot in spirit, replaying her laughter like a lullaby, waiting for the door to open, for the sentence to be passed, for the dream to end. But it did not. Because in the halls of Henry's desire, queens are not chosen to be cherished, they are chosen to be ended. The conspiracy did not arrive with thunder or blood, but with a whisper that curled beneath locked doors and slid between pages like a pressed petal rotting in secret. It began not with men in armor, but with fingers trembling over parchment, ink that bled like bruises across the names she had once dared to speak in softness. The Queen had written letters, and letters in Tudor England were not affection, they were ammunition. Francis Derham's name was pulled from the ashes of forgotten intimacy, and like smoke, it reached every corridor. Once he had touched her waist beneath moonless windows. Once he had called her his wife, not as law commands, but as lust believes. And that belief, that small defiance of the sacred body now belonging to the king, was the wound that bled into the very throne. But it was not Derham alone. There was another Thomas Culpeper who walked too closely, who lingered too long outside her chamber door. He had eyes that did not look at the Queen, but through her. And she, still a girl stitched in longing, had dared to imagine herself more than an emblem in satin. The court remembered. They always remembered. Every misplaced touch, every sidelong glance catalogued in the perfumed breath of those who serve and smile and vanish. The palace is not made of stone, it is made of mouths. Lady Rochford, who had once danced with madness, now danced with fear. She had helped arrange meetings, passed notes folded like prayers, lit candles in the wrong windows. But fear twists the neck to look away from loyalty. When questioned, she bent like rotted wood, cracking not in rage, but in terror. The Queen had no allies now, only shadows that slinked from room to room, reporting her every breath as if it were treason. Interrogations unfolded like funerals, quiet, methodical, lined with black. No screams, just the drip of questions over bone. Derham was dragged forward, not as a man, but as a specimen. His flesh was offered to the crown's wrath, and what followed was not justice, but theater. He was stretched, broken, and unmade before an audience that had long since ceased blinking. They tore out his truth and called it evidence, and when his body could confess no further, they turned to Culpeper, who spoke not of sin, but of silence. His words were sparse, but his implication was a dagger. The Queen had betrayed not just the king, but the kingdom's illusion of order, the fiction that youth could save a crumbling throne. In reality, she had betrayed nothing but the script written for her, yet the punishment was already rehearsed. The council convened not to judge, but to remember what needed to be done. The king, swollen with humiliation, did not speak of pain, but of treachery. his pride, already blistered by his body's decay, now burned with public mockery. Catherine, once called his rose, was now a weed to be plucked before it spread. His silence was not mercy. It was calculation. He allowed others to speak the words treason, adultery, execution as if the syllables came from heaven, not from a man gasping for control of a world unraveling under his gout-ridden feet. Meanwhile, the court returned to its feast, forks clicking like bones, goblets raised in toast to a queen not yet dead. The conspiracy fed not on facts, but on anticipation. Every noble mouth repeated the tale, shaping it to fit the performance. Some whispered she had lain with both men. Others swore there had been secret pregnancies. One rumor said she had planned to poison the king. Truth had long since fled. All that remained was the echo of Catherine's laughter, now curdled into guilt. She was imprisoned in her own chamber before the tower received her, a queen, locked in her silk, unable to sleep for the sound of her own heart thrashing in her chest. Each day, another voice vanished from her side. The guards changed, the maids were reassigned, even her dogs were taken. They stripped her not only of title, but of memory. They wanted her to forget she had ever been touched, loved, named. And yet, in those long hours of waiting, Catherine did not scream. Her mind wandered back to the gardens where she had once walked in spring, the cold stone benches where she had whispered foolish secrets into airs that would not keep them. She thought of her mother, long dead, of the sea she had never seen, of the music that once played while her feet danced beneath the candlelight. Believing she was being admired and not appraised, she imagined escape not as flight, but as vanishing. What if she simply ceased to exist, unremembered, unwritten, unburied? But Tudor courts do not forget women. They consume them and then wear their bones as warnings. The interrogations resumed, and this time, it was her turn. The questions were gentle at first, soft-spoken, with hands folded as if in prayer, but each silence was pierced with accusation. Each memory she tried to frame in innocence became a noose tightening with each breath. She denied. She faltered. She remembered too much. She remembered too little. Her voice cracked, not from guilt, but from the realization that no answer could return her to the crown. She began to speak of Culpeper, of stolen moments, of a heart that had dared to believe in affection after marriage. She tried to explain what cannot be explained, that a girl raised among whispers does not know the sound of true danger until it swallows her. The council heard only confession. The scribes dipped their pens into her tears and wrote down the sentence that had already been written before her first kiss. Treason, adultery, condemnation. Then came the tower. Its gates opened not with rust, but with hunger. The walls breathed cold. The stone floor drank the warmth from her feet. She was led not with chains, but with silence. The women assigned to her did not speak. They watched. They counted her meals. They measured her sighs. Catherine did not sleep in the tower. She drifted. Her dreams bled into waking memories of laughter smeared with red. Corridors that whispered, shadows shaped like kings with butcher's eyes. She begged for mercy, not from Henry, but from time. She wanted only one thing: to die knowing the date, but even that was denied her. They left her in the dark of uncertainty, where every knock could mean tomorrow. Each footstep echoed like a drumbeat to her end. Her hair began to fall. Her skin lost its hue, and yet her eyes, once bright, did not dim, they sharpened. She began to understand what queens are: not women, not wives, but warnings. In those last weeks, she read no scripture. She wrote no pleas. She walked the same 3 paces in her cell, over and over, tracing the outline of her erasure. When news of Culpeper's execution reached her, she did not flinch. She had loved the idea of him, not the man. When she heard of Dirham's quartering, she closed her eyes, not in prayer, but in shame, not for what she had done, but for the way memory betrays. She remembered his voice, trembling in the old days, calling her beloved, calling her wife. She wondered if he remembered her smile before the mask of court turned it into armor. But such thoughts brought no comfort, only quiet. Then came the whispers again this time, of scaffold, of axe, of time finally named. She was told she would die at dawn. She did not cry. She asked for a block, not to hide behind. To practice, she knelt, again and again, lowering her neck with precision, not out of piety, but preparation. She wanted to meet the blade like a queen, even if she had never been allowed to live like one. And so, on the night before, she did not eat. She did not sleep. She folded her hands in her lap and stared into the dark, as if searching for the girl she had been before court, before gowns, before guilt. But the girl was gone. What remained was silence, perfectly still, perfectly shaped. Dawn did not arrive in light. It crawled in like a thief, dragging the cold behind it, pressing its frost-bitten fingers against the bare neck of the condemned. Catherine Howard awoke without protest, for she had not truly slept. Her final night had passed in a silence so thick it drowned breath. There was no priest, no lover, only the muffled footsteps of guards who dared not look too long. They brought her the gown she had requested, simple, white, no embroidery, no symbols to remember her by. She dressed herself slowly, deliberately, as though threading cloth through a corpse. Every button was a prayer unspoken, every fold an offering to the void. Her hands trembled only once, when they reached for the veil, not to hide her face, but to shield the world from what remained of her. There was no need for ceremony. The procession was short, winding through the marrow of the tower where time had thickened into stone, and air bore the scent of history's most silenced women. She passed the arch where Anne Boleyn had once breathed her last, and in the invisible dust, the memory clung, two queens joined not by blood, but by betrayal. And still, no one spoke her name aloud. The guards led her like one leads an offering, not with force, but with inevitability. The scaffold rose from the ground like a mouth waiting to devour her. Black wood slick with dew, iron nails glinting like teeth. A thin crowd had gathered not to mourn, but to witness. The spectacle of the fallen queen was as necessary to power as the crown itself. It reminded them all that even the softest smile can end in ruin. Catherine stepped onto the platform with a stillness unnatural for a girl of barely 18. She did not cry. She did not plead. She merely looked out across the faceless mass and saw, perhaps for the first time, the full shape of her life, how quickly joy had turned to judgment, how easily touch became treachery. The block stood waiting, stained with the history of other women whose love had been labeled treason. The executioner did not speak. He adjusted his blade with the intimacy of a man preparing to touch skin. She asked only one thing to say goodbye, not to the crowd, not to the king, but to herself. She whispered a name no one heard, folded her hands, and knelt. Her movement was fluid, practiced, as though the body had already rehearsed its own departure. Her neck rested against the grain of the wood, and in that moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, not in reverence, but in hunger. The axe fell with a sound not like thunder, but like the closing of a door that would never open again. There was no scream, only the dull finality of severance, the thud of something once holy returned to dust. Her head rolled, not like a ball, but like a secret once held, now loosed. The executioner raised it, blood still wet, hair clinging to her cheeks like mourning ribbons. Some say her eyes remained open, some say they wept. But truth had already fled the scene. The queen was dead, and history, as it always does, began its slow work of misremembering. They buried her near Anne Boleyn, though no stone marked her place. She was folded into the soil as if shamed by the very act of remembrance. No songs were sung, no monuments built. The court resumed its masquerade, slipping Catherine's name into silence, smearing it with sin, softening it with rumor. She became not a girl, but a ghost used to warn others, to thrill gossip, to haunt lonely halls in whispered legend. They said she ran screaming through the tower, barefoot and bleeding, crying out for mercy. They said she was mad when the blade found her. They said she laughed, or cursed, or prayed. All lies. The truth was simpler and far more cruel. She died exactly as they required, beautiful, ruined, and forgotten. Henry did not mourn her. He did not even mention her. To speak her name would be to admit the illusion had cracked. The spell had failed. His body still rotted. His throne still trembled. And no girl, not even a rose without a thorn, could redeem what had already decayed from within. He moved on to another wife, another hope, another silence. But Catherine lingered, not in memory, but in myth. She became a shape in the corner of a mirror, a voice at the end of a hallway. The girls who came after her would glance toward the tower windows and wonder if love was worth the blade. Her story lived not in books, but in the quiet fear of those who dared to feel. For Catherine had not betrayed the king, she had betrayed the fiction, that a woman could be both adored and free. That softness could be survival. That youth could be protection. She had believed in the heart within the cage, not knowing the bars were made of ritual. And no matter how sweetly one sings, the ritual must be completed. She was not the last to fall, but she was among the first to fall, believing she might rise. And for that, history punished her not only with death, but with distortion. Her letters were destroyed, her belongings scattered, her name scraped from the mouth of the court like rot from fruit. Only the cold of the tower remembered her, and the block and the blade that drank her name. In time, they spoke of her again, but only as a caution. She became a parable told in the voice of patriarchy of what happens when a girl forgets to fear. Her love was not a sin, but it was treated as heresy. Her touch was not betrayal, but it was branded as such. And still, the silence she left behind was louder than any cry for justice. The stone where she fell remained wet in imagination, forever glistening with blood that history cannot wash clean. They called her foolish, they called her wanton, but they never called her real. And in that, her death continues. For to be erased is not just to die, it is to never have lived at all. Catherine Howard, Queen of England, became a ghost before the axe ever touched her. And to this day, when the wind shifts cold over the tower, when the moon hangs low and the walls breathe in memory, there are those who say they see her, a girl, barely grown, dressed in white, her mouth open not in scream, but in silence, forever approaching the scaffold, forever kneeling, forever forgotten. They say the tower forgets nothing, yet it speaks in echoes, not names. Catherine Howard left behind no crown, no heir, no monument, only a question, not carved into stone, but suspended in the breathless dark between steps, between whispers, between the moment a girl kneels and the moment her breath is no longer hers. Was she ever real? Or was she only ever a reflection of lust, of power, of the need to believe that youth could silence rot? Her body dissolved into soil, but her image lingers like perfume in a room long abandoned. She was not the first to bleed in white, and she would not be the last. The scaffold does not choose queens. It merely waits. In the hush after her execution, even the crows grew still. The sky did not mourn. The bells did not toll. Her death was too quiet, too precise. It fit too perfectly into the machinery of kings. Yet still, her presence coils beneath the stone corridors, an ache that has no source. She is there in the silence between footsteps, in the shiver of candlelight near locked doors, in the eyes of women who smile too quickly and fall too soon. History dressed her in shame. But the tower remembers her shape, bent in prayer, bent in practice, bent in the moment before vanishing. If she returned tonight barefoot, bloodless, and unfinished, would anyone recognize her? Or has the world forgotten the face of the girl who died trying to be more than a rumor? The blade was not her end. The forgetting was. And so she walks still, not seeking vengeance, not even justice, just a name, just one voice to say, softly, in the dark, you were real. No one ever does.